One claims it's the company's only chance for survival.
Atari has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The 31-year-old
AWA presents the difference. Kodak is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
What's up, guys? My name is Jake, and welcome to the 36th episode of Bankrupt. Of all the many chain restaurants across North America, or even the world, there's always been one rather infamous major brand which has combined the sports bar chicken wing experience with flirtatious waitresses wearing tight-fitting uniforms. Hooters was once a massive chain that exploded through the 80s and 90s, growing to well over 400 locations around the world with tens of thousands of employees on payroll. But times have changed, and the company, which started in the early 1980s, has changed with it, ultimately filing for bankruptcy in 2025. So join me today as we find out what happened to this iconic and perhaps infamous restaurant brand. It began with 6 businessmen in Florida who collectively wanted to open a restaurant and bar that differed from the popular and more upscale establishments of the time. Since these 6 men were all friends and didn't exactly have much experience in this business, they were all taking a chance, and in 1983, they would open Hooters. This certainly wasn't the look of a TGI Fridays or Ruby Tuesday. Hooters opened in a rather shabby wooden structure in Clearwater, Florida. Its interiors were lined with unvarnished wood panels, sheet metal for the ceiling, and for some reason, a rubber chicken in a coffin. Regardless of their cheap startup and very limited menu, Hooters was banking on their gimmicks to get them by. From their humorous menus predominantly featuring chicken wings, to the exclusively local attractive waitresses that they hired. Hooters was certainly a rough around the edges sports bar and restaurant, one that leaned heavily into their predominantly male clientele. And following some local press after some sports teams had visited the bar, this original location was already a tremendous hit. This early success caught the interest of additional investors, particularly Hugh Connerty and later Bob Brooks, who saw the brand as something that could be expanded well beyond the borders of Clearwater. After just 1 year of operation, Hooters franchise rights were sold to a restaurant investment firm out of Atlanta. The small singular restaurant had now become a legitimate brand, one with a real corporation behind it, and it was now expanding rapidly. In just 2 years, the chain had grown to over 11 locations and still expanding. Hooters was now all about their sex appeal. In 1985, they introduced the Hooters Girl, essentially a spokesperson who appeared in commercials, billboards, and even their new annual calendar. Hooters girls would even end up on TV through the late 1980s, and the company as a whole continued to heavily market their flirtatious, usually young waitresses dressed in tight-fitting shorts and tops. It also helped that their no-frills restaurants were approachable and had cheap, good food on offer. From the business side, it also meant that these restaurants were relatively cheap to build. Consumers were eating it up, quite literally, and the chain continued to explode in growth, with over 100 restaurants by the end of 1993. Sales had followed suit, with the company now earning around $200 million in net sales, an enormous growth in just under a decade. By this point, the company had kind of become a cultural phenomenon, a brand name synonymous with its many in-your-face gimmicks, but it also played a large part in the rise of the popularity of chicken wings in America. This was obviously a winning formula that created loyal customers, and with each new franchise and restaurant that opened, Hooters just expanded their brand recognition and reach even further. While the chain continued to grow, now well past 170 locations by the mid-90s, their success wasn't totally without controversy. As I'm sure you've already guessed by now, not only was there outrage over the overt way the company had their waitresses dress, with many female-oriented organizations understandably calling out their objectifying marketing, but even the federal government had criticized the company over only hiring women and not allowing men to be employed as waiters. The company responded by refusing any mandates and performing a march filled with Hooters girls in Washington. On top of this, there were also some high-profile lawsuits filed over allegations of harassment within their restaurants. Hooters responded by denying and ultimately settling out of court. Of course, though, this wouldn't be the only lawsuit of this nature being filed against the chain in the coming years. Regardless, the company continued to grow exponentially and internationally. They would open locations in Canada, Mexico, and even as far as Singapore, opening the overseas market for even further expansion. Apparently, Hooters' appeal wasn't exclusive to just America. The company now had over 250 restaurants across 40 states, and by now, one of the original Atlanta investors, Bob Brooks, had bought controlling shares of the corporation. At this point, Hooters was split into two major entities. Hooters of America was the corporate one, which controlled most of the branding and owned a portion of the restaurants outright. This was while Hooters Inc. was the largest franchisee. Brooks had taken control of Hooters of America, and with the brand name in hand, he saw potential to expand beyond the restaurant sector. So, in 2003, Hooters took to the skies. Yeah, this is a real thing. Brooke made a deal with a very small charter airline called Pace Airlines to launch Hooters Air. It was made up of a fleet of mostly old 737-200s and 737-300s. They offered relatively cheap fares, targeted to leisure travelers in and out of Myrtle Beach. While the actual real flight attendants wore normal uniforms, each flight did have two Hooters girls on board, selling merch and interacting with passengers. While the Owl had now taken flight, meanwhile, the main restaurant chain had now over 400 locations, much of them spread around the United States, but also just literally around the world. Hooters was a big brand by this point, one which Brooks still thought he could take even further. In February 2006, Hooters Casino Hotel opened just behind the former Tropicana Resort in Las Vegas. This newly rebranded hotel was offered as a budget option, one that initially wasn't doing all that well, thanks to low interest from families, wealthy travelers, and women, all of which didn't really see the brand as an appealing hotel option in Vegas. That brand sentiment also carried on into the skies, as Hooters Air was also struggling. Low interest from travelers outside of men, rising fuel costs, and lackluster routes all contributed to quarterly losses for the business, and the airline ultimately ceased operation 2 months after the casino opened. The big changes didn't stop there though, as just a few months after that, Bob Brooks would pass away, leaving much of the company to his children. The family would continue the expansion efforts of the brand, mainly overseas. However, it became clear that they didn't want to run the company for an extended period of time, and ultimately began accepting bids for an acquisition. Unsurprisingly, many of those bids came from private equity. After several years of legal proceedings, Kobe Brooks, the son of Bob, who had been acting as CEO, finally made the sale in 2011. This had just followed the company's highest reported revenue of around $1.2 billion, though following the recession, it would soon decline. North Carolina-based private equity firm Chanticleer Holdings Inc. would take over ownership, and already the effects of this new owner could be felt. Almost immediately, several locations closed unexpectedly and without warning. Despite this, and following their 30th anniversary in 2013, Hooters had peaked at its number of locations at around 452 across 25 countries, 340 of which were all in the US. The new owners would also introduce a refined and modern logo along with a new restaurant look. You know what, of all the modernized minimalist restaurant designs of this era, honestly, this didn't look that bad. The same couldn't be said for Hoots, their new casual brand, which would not only sell wings, but also seafood. Now this interior was a painfully boring and modern restaurant, one which even had male waiters. So really, this new restaurant concept was mostly being propped up just on the pedigree of the quality of their chicken wings. This is all while new competitors like Wingstop had been growing exponentially, a much more casual and palatable option for consumers of all walks of life. The same couldn't really be said about Hooters. As a more direct competitor though, Twin Peaks had also been growing, a brand following a similar philosophy as Hooters with scantily dressed waitresses, but done in a warmer, themed environment with a more diverse menu that appealed a bit more to millennials. As a result, Hooters' mainline brand had been slowly declining. Stagnating sales and closing restaurants had only decreased their overall footprint. And following the closure of the casino resort in 2017, it was being reported that Chanticleer Holdings was looking to offload the company in a sale. In 2019, Hooters was acquired by two more private equity firms, Hooters, Nordbay Capital, and Tri-Artisan Capital Advisors. The latter may sound familiar though, as they also own TGI Fridays, which went well. To make this transaction, and believe me, we've heard this before, they would take out debt to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars just to purchase the company from another private equity firm. They would then saddle Hooters with all of this debt with the intent to slowly pay it off over time. It's a great strategy, truly devised by the top business minds, and I'm sure it'll pan out just fine. Aside from adding an enormous amount of debt to the company, the new owners vowed to breathe new life into it, as well as expand their Hoots casual chain. But of course, the following year would see the pandemic and subsequent lockdown measures. Hooters was particularly hit bad, with sales dropping nearly 30% and sliding even further by 2021. That year, they posted around $600 million in sales, a significant drop from where they were just a decade prior. While sales did increase by 2023, their number of locations didn't, with just around 290 left in America. While the company was private, as it has always been, the exact financial conditions the chain was in are difficult to fully know for sure. That said, by summer of 2024, the company admitted they were struggling with rising expenses. As a result, they would close 40 restaurants that they called underperforming locations. While rising expenses were certainly a factor, industry observers were quick to identify the other likely root causes of their issues. Mainly with the fact that millennials didn't have a great brand perception of the, let's face it, objectifying chain. And it's not hard to see why most women wouldn't be interested in going there. The quality of their food and restaurants subsequently took a big hit as well, with longtime customers noticing, some even giving up on the chain entirely. Again, add on rising labor and supply prices, Hooters began to struggle making good on their hefty debt payments. Even a motorsports team for NASCAR was suing them over unpaid sponsorship fees. As sales continued to slump, liquid cash was running out to meet their increasingly demanding expenses. It was reported that in February 2025, the company may be preparing to file for bankruptcy. And sure enough, on March 31st, 2025, Hooters of America had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. At the time of their filing and intentions to restructure, it was reported that the company was in over $370 million worth of debt. Much of it was originally taken out to acquire the company in the first place. While initially the chain did say they would keep the remaining locations open, the bankruptcy had revealed just how far they had fallen. In total, there were 305 Hooters locations left in the world, though at least 30 of them would close permanently in the months following this. Additionally, their annual sales had fallen to around $678 million, a 94% decrease since 2009. While initially it wasn't really known what would happen with a seemingly dying corporate brand, in October of 2025, a lifeline was thrown their way. Throughout all of this time, Hooters' largest franchisee, now owned by some of the original founders of the very first one back in Florida, well, it had survived this whole time operating 22 locations in Illinois and Florida. In fact, while the corporate brand had been slowly dying, Hooters Inc., which owned these 22 locations, had been more or less thriving, operating some of the highest revenue restaurants in the whole chain. Regardless if they were the original founders or not, they were still just a franchisee, and they couldn't really control how the brand was being marketed or changed over the years. So, with some additional funding and other franchisees joining, Hooters Inc. and the original founders had announced that they would be acquiring back the entire corporate side of the brand out of bankruptcy. This was a pretty incredible twist that is rarely seen, in which the original founders returned after so long, especially after the company has been through 2 private equity takeovers. That is pretty remarkable. That's not to say that the damage hasn't already been done though. Aside from renaming a few of the restaurants to the original Hooters, the new owners have publicly claimed that the chain will now pivot more towards families, toning down the ever more tightly fitting waitress uniforms and making the whole experience a lot more modest. With a higher emphasis on quality food, renovated stores, and smaller menus, the new corporate direction believes this will be the key to attracting all demographics into their restaurants. They claim that their friendly and comfortable sports bar environment paired with quality chicken wings will be enough to keep the brand going into the future. However, even this new management team admits their largest issue going forward is the perception many have with the brand and its legacy. If anyone has done any research on the company, you'll find many employees speaking up about workplace harassment and even racial discrimination. From a consumer experience perspective, if anyone has visited a formerly corporate-run Hooters recently, you'd probably find a not very well-reviewed, painfully bland restaurant, some in pretty bad, even disgusting condition. Now, of course, given that, I also had to try it out. So I drove down to the closest restaurant to me, which is in Niagara Falls. I visited on a Monday afternoon during a pretty miserable day weather-wise, so it was no surprise that the restaurant was literally empty. Like, not a single other customer in here with us. Since I brought my parents with me, we all tried something different on the menu. My mom got the quesadilla, which was greasy and not very good. My dad got the Philly cheesesteak, which was a bit better. And Emmy and I both got the classic wings. And you know what? Initially I thought these were actually pretty good. I liked the crunch, and the price wasn't too bad. However, they were drenched in sauce, to the point where I started to dislike them the more I ate. That paired with the pretty bad fried pickles, well, it all gave me a bit of a stomachache. Since this Hooters was attached to a Quality Inn, one which just happened to be under heavy renovation, to use the washroom, we were directed to go through the under construction hotel, go up a floor, and use the makeshift public restroom out of one of the former guest rooms. This wasn't the restaurant's fault, and I'm sure this is temporary, but it was so funny that I just had to mention it. Weird Niagara Falls location aside, the Hooters as a whole just felt like a tired, boring chain restaurant. One I would never choose to go to over an independently owned pub or something. Especially with this low quality of food, I just didn't really get it. In the end though, in my opinion, the Hooters restaurant concept is just well out of date in today's society. It's no surprise that the brand, which has been objectifying women for decades, has a bad reputation. And as younger consumers gravitate away from mainline chains like this for both the quality and ethics of their food, I think it is going to be a struggle for the new direction of the company. I can't really foresee a family, at least in masses, saying that they want to go to Hooters for dinner. At a nationwide and even worldwide scale, changing their long-established perception into something more palatable with a modern generation, a generation that now has families, I think it's just going to be very hard. In my sphere, I've always seen Hooters as a joke, a place I would only go to if literally every other independent wing place was closed. And even still, it's just not a vibe I really care for. The only way they got me into one was by going bankrupt and for me to make this video. I think that negative perception will linger on with a lot of people into the future. But at the very least, there does seem to be genuine, passionate leadership behind the brand today, which is more than you could say about the faceless corporate overlords, which for years had drowned it in ungodly amounts of debt. Perhaps with the right social consciousness, innovative restaurant practices, and authentic feeling spaces, Hooters may live to see another 41 years. Thank you so much for watching my work through the last year. With some big projects that I'm working on right now, I'm obviously very excited for next year. If you're new to these videos, please do consider subscribing, and don't forget I also have a second channel, Bright Sun Travels. As always though, my name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.